Welcome to Brain Boogerz, where we get real about mental health, life lessons, and forward motion. I'm MJ, and today we're talking about an issue that's close to my heart, and honestly, a little uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about from either side of the dynamic: narcissism. You might be thinking, that's not me, or that's just for toxic exes. But before we make growth harder by protecting ourselves from what we might see in introspection, let's start with the simplest and most loaded question. Am I a narcissist? Because in that one act of self-awareness, we can start to understand what narcissism is, how it shows up, and where we've experienced it toward us or by us. You ready? Let's dig in. And if you haven't already, please click subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And if you know someone who might find value in this topic, share it with them, because we're all in this together. Quick heads up. This episode discusses narcissism and relational trauma. My hope and effort is focused on empowering you with awareness, language, and tools for introspection and growth. As you listen, some of the stories, examples, or topics may bring up strong emotions, discomfort, or memories of past hurt. My intention is to offer education, validation, and hope, not blame or shame. Listen at your own pace and do what feels right for you. If you start to feel uneasy, overwhelmed, or triggered at any point, please take care of yourself. Pause, skip ahead, or reach out for support. Take a moment to write down what you're feeling, give your brain a break from constant buffering, and give yourself the time and attention you may need. And remember, you're not alone. If you need help, you can contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-SAFE. Or reach out to a mental health professional in your area. Before we go any further, and this is me saying it with love, I dedicate this episode to you, the fellow narcissist listening to find out if this episode is about you. It's okay. It is. Also, don't panic, because this isn't a courtroom. This is a mirror, and mirrors are for information, not punishment. Alright, now that we've got the mirror out, let's start with what narcissism actually is, what it isn't, and why clarity matters. And when I say mirror, I mean it, because this topic will have you seeing yourself in places you didn't expect. Sometimes as the one harmed, sometimes as the one doing harm, and sometimes as the one who didn't even realize what you were participating in. It took me decades to realize I had narcissistic traits, and that I was also drawn to other people's narcissism. I just didn't have the language for it yet. I'd never really studied narcissism beyond a quick mention in a high school humanities class. But when I started trying to tell the difference between neuroticism and narcissism, I went down the rabbit hole: personality disorders, antisocial behavior, the whole thing. And the more I read, the more I started seeing examples in my life where I'd been the perpetrator or the victim or both. And then came a moment of enlightenment. Recently, a longtime acquaintance did something that made me rethink behaviors I used to call ambitious, but now it felt fixed, repetitive, and performative. And I'm not going to drag you through every detail, but let me give you the highlight reel. They asked for my opinion, then devalued it. They invaded my personal space twice, like boundaries were a suggestion. They pulled me into triangulation with another person, and they tried to argue a basic fact using fallacies and straight up falsehoods. That's when I started wondering, okay, am I dealing with narcissism here? And if I am, what type and what level? So I did what we all do when we're trying to name a thing. I Googled it. But I didn't want confirmation bias, I wanted psychoeducation. I wanted to know what I was actually looking at. So my next move was to dive into books on narcissism and how it's expressed. Different authors lit up years of interactions and experiences for me. And none of these are sponsored. This is just what I actually use to get my head around it. Books such as The Narcissist's Playbook, Surviving a Narcissist, Becoming a Narcissist's Nightmare, both narcissistic mothers and narcissistic fathers, how to recognize and how to deal with your narcissistic mother or father, Disarming the Narcissist 3rd edition, and When Narcissism Comes to Church, broke down how narcissism looks from relationships to church, to work, to family. I began to realize I was validating harmful behavior instead of bringing awareness to it. I was feeding the manipulation, the triangulation, the gaslighting, the love bombing, the blame shifting. I was feeding that need for attention, that protection of self-esteem, that sense of superiority. And if I'm being honest, I noticed it early and I shrugged it off. And I'm not proud of that, I'm just naming it. Because my ego loved the compliments, so I welcomed it, I enabled it, I enjoyed the idealization, and it greased the wheels of my own somatic narcissism. And after all this learning, a part of me wanted to tell them, to confront it, to see them improve. But that's what I wanted. And being my brother's keeper has limits. Most of the books will tell you this. If you walk up to a narcissist and call them a narcissist, you're probably not about to have a breakthrough conversation. You're about to have a shouting match. So my hope is that if we can learn how narcissism manifests in each of us, we can start breaking the pattern through discovery, introspection, and growth. And if we can also see how our relationships with narcissists can form and get reinforced through trauma bonding, then we can approach recovery with actual self-management tools. And that brings me back to the mirror. So, to the person in the reflective surface, let's start with a question most people avoid. Am I a narcissist? It's a question loaded with stigma, but research suggests that curiosity about our own behavior is actually a sign of self-awareness, not narcissism. In fact, studies suggest that people who worry they might be narcissistic are less likely to meet criteria for narcissistic personality disorder than people who never question themselves at all. And I'll be honest, it took me years to even consider that question for myself, mostly because I thought narcissists were other people. But once I started noticing my own patterns, I realized something uncomfortable and freeing at the same time. Most of us have narcissistic traits to some degree. That's why it helps to think of narcissism as a spectrum, not a label. On one end, you've got healthy self-esteem and ambition. On the other end, you've got entitlement, lack of empathy, and manipulation. In a 2008 study, an estimated 6% of the US population met the clinical criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. But nearly everyone shows some narcissistic traits at times. And research suggests narcissism tends to peak in adolescence and early adulthood, then gradually declines with age. Here's the truth. Everybody has moments of self-absorption. Research shows narcissistic traits are present to varying degrees in all people. The danger is when those traits become chronic patterns that harm ourselves or the people around us. And here's something interesting. One study found that when people were asked, "Are you a narcissist?" and they were given a clear definition, those who answered yes were usually pretty accurate in their self-assessment. So simply being willing to ask the question and answer honestly already sets you apart from the more harmful clinical end of the spectrum. So, are you a narcissist? Maybe a little, maybe not at all. But the real power is in asking and being willing to see yourself clearly, flaws and all. Because growth isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest and choosing moment by moment to show up better for yourself first, and as a result, for the people you care about. So, here's a rapid fire self-check. In conflict, am I listening to understand or listening to win? When I feel criticized, do I get curious or defensive? And day to day, am I focused on how I look or how I land? If you're nodding along, you're not alone. These are common human tendencies. The difference is what we do next. Before we go any deeper, here are the takeaways I want you holding in your hands. Self-awareness isn't narcissism. Asking the question is a sign you're capable of reflection and growth. Narcissism is a spectrum. Traits show up in all humans sometimes. The issue is pattern, intensity, and impact. self-respect isn't narcissism. Boundaries and confidence are healthy. Narcissism becomes harmful when it's fueled by entitlement, lack of empathy, and a need for admiration at other people's expense. And traits aren't the same as a disorder. A diagnosis is about persistence and impairment, not a bad day, a bruised ego, or a defensive moment. So, here are 2 quick questions to ground you. Do I care how my actions affect other people? And am I open to feedback and willing to repair when I miss it? If yes, you're practicing self-awareness, not perfection, self-awareness. So, this week, if you want to shift from self-absorption to self-awareness, try this. Notice the pattern. This week, listen to yourself in conversation. Are you listening or just waiting to respond? Then practice the pause. When you feel defensive, try, "They may be right, let me sit with this for a minute." Then invite feedback from a safe person. Ask, "How do you experience me when we disagree? What could I do differently?" And then, don't rush to fix it on the spot. Take time to reflect before you react. Journal one moment and write about a time you struggled to admit you were wrong. What felt at stake? Image, control, safety, pride, belonging? Alright, now that we've got the foundation, let's break down narcissism from logic to liabilities. Narcissism isn't just about how much someone has, money, status, looks, followers, and it's not one size fits all. It's about how it shows up. And that's where types and levels come in. Psychologists sometimes call these domain-specific expressions of narcissism. Think of types like different flavors. Same core ingredients, image protection, validation seeking, entitlement, but different packaging. There's grandiose or overt narcissism, which is the classic stereotype. Outgoing, attention-seeking, confident, sometimes arrogant, they crave admiration, love the spotlight, and often brush off criticism. Then there's the vulnerable or covert narcissism, which can be harder to spot. It can look like insecurity, sensitivity, or anxiety, but underneath, there's still a strong need for validation, and criticism can feel like an attack. There's the communal narcissism. This is the "I'm the most helpful, the most caring, the most selfless" version. It sounds positive, but it can still be about being seen as special just through service instead of status. There's the antagonistic narcissism. This is the always competing, always needing to win, often at someone else's expense version. Think rivalry, hostility, and a tendency to put others down to stay on top. And finally, we have the malignant narcissism. This is the rare, most destructive blend. Narcissism mixed with aggression, paranoia, or antisocial traits. It's not common, but when it's present, it can be deeply harmful. And these aren't just labels for fun. Research suggests these patterns can predict how someone behaves in relationships, at work, and even online. Now, let's talk about levels, because narcissism isn't an on-off switch. It's more like a dimmer. There's the low level, which is occasional self-centeredness, but you can empathize, admit mistakes, and stay connected. Then there's the moderate level. This is where entitlement or defensiveness shows up more often. Criticism hits harder, but there's still some self-awareness and the capacity to grow. And then finally, the high level or pathological. This is persistent lack of empathy, constant need for admiration, and manipulative or harmful behavior. This is where narcissistic personality disorder can come in. One large study estimated about 6% of the US population meets this criteria. And most people, maybe even you, maybe even me, live somewhere in that low to moderate range. That's part of being human. So when you're trying to spot narcissism, whether in yourself or someone else, the goal isn't to diagnose. It's to look past the stereotypes and pay attention to the patterns. Emotional patterns, interpersonal patterns, psychological patterns, and behavioral red flags. And yeah, This is the part where you might start mentally scrolling through people you know. Just breathe. We're staying in the mirror. Now, when you're trying to spot narcissistic patterns, again, not diagnose, just notice, it helps to look at 4 buckets: emotional, interpersonal, psychological, and behavioral. For emotional patterns, these show up in how someone handles feelings, especially shame, criticism, and vulnerability. They are lack of empathy, difficulty recognizing or caring about other people's feelings or needs, emotional reactivity. This is extreme sensitivity to criticism or perceived slights, sometimes anger, rage, or deep shame. There's fragile self-esteem, outward confidence that's actually covering insecurity or a fear of being exposed. And then there's envy, frequent jealousy of other people's success, or a belief that other people are jealous of them. With interpersonal patterns, this is how it shows up in relationships and how they treat other people. There's entitlement, or the belief that they deserve special treatment, privileges, or admiration, regardless of merit. There's manipulativeness, using charm, flattery, guilt, or intimidation to get what they want. There's exploitation, taking advantage of other people for personal gain without guilt or remorse. There's superficial relationships, seeing people as tools for validation, status, or utility, not as whole humans. And then there's boundary violations, disregarding other people's limits, privacy, or autonomy. On psychological patterns, this is the internal operating system, how they think about themselves and the world. There's grandiosity, inflated sense of self-importance, uniqueness or superiority, exaggerating achievements or talents. There's a need for admiration, constant craving for praise, attention, or validation. There's the fantasy world, living in fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, or ideal love. There's denial and blame shifting. This is rarely accepting responsibility and externalizing fault. And black and white thinking. People in situations are either perfect or worthless. No nuance, no gray area. And finally, behavioral red flags. These are the tactics you may actually experience on the receiving end. Love bombing, the overwhelming affection, gifts, or praise early on, followed by withdrawal or devaluation. There's triangulation, pitting people against each other to create competition or maintain control. And chronic boundary testing, pushing limits to see what they can get away with. And if you're listening thinking, whew, I've seen some of that, just remember, one trait doesn't equal a diagnosis. This reminds me of that specific feeling of going crazy, like you can't trust your own mind anymore. So what is crazy-making behavior in narcissistic dynamics? Crazy-making is a set of psychological tactics, often subtle, persistent, and confusing, used by narcissists and other manipulators to destabilize your sense of reality, your self-trust, and your emotional balance. Alright, so here are some common crazy-making tactics. Gaslighting, denying things that happened, rewriting history, or insisting you're imagining things. Here's an example.
That never happened.
Or you're too sensitive. There's the contradictory communication, saying one thing and doing another, giving mixed messages, changing the story, incongruence. There's blame shifting, turning every conversation back on you, no matter what, you're always at fault. There's projection, accusing you of the very things they're doing, lying, cheating, manipulating. There's trivializing or minimizing, dismissing your feelings as unimportant or exaggerated.
You're overreacting.
There's withholding or stonewalling, refusing to engage, answer questions, or acknowledge your concerns, leaving you confused and desperate for clarity. There's sudden mood swings, there are unpredictable reactions that keep you walking on eggshells, and idealization and devaluation, pulling you close with praise and affection, then withdrawing, criticizing, or punishing you, so you start questioning what's real. And you may be wondering why people use crazy-making tactics. It's not because you're weak, not because you're stupid, Because it works. See, there's control. It destabilizes your confidence and makes you easier to manipulate. It's deflection, as it keeps the focus off their behavior and onto your supposed problems. And there's dependency, as it erodes your self-trust, so you start relying on their version of reality. Now, here are some signs you might be experiencing it. You might notice you second-guess your memories or perceptions. You feel confused, anxious, or off balance around this person. You apologize constantly or feel like you can't do anything right. Or you start wondering if you're the problem. Now, here's what you can do that's practical, not perfect. A few grounded steps are: document. Keep notes of conversations, incidents, and your feelings. Reality checks. Talk to a trusted friend, advocate, or a therapist to validate what you're experiencing. Boundaries. Limit engagement with manipulative conversations. Try scripts like, "I see things differently," or
I'm not going to argue about my reality.
And self-compassion. Remind yourself that confusion is a normal response to abnormal behavior. So, have you ever left a conversation feeling more confused or less confident than when you started? And what helped you regain clarity? And gently, without shame, which of these patterns have you seen in your family, at work, or in romantic relationships, or maybe even in yourself? How do they make you feel? And what boundary might you need next? And here's why naming matters. A lot of us can't escape what we can't define. The desire for knowledge is the beginning of wisdom. You might not feel empowered immediately, but clarity is how empowerment starts. Have you ever felt like you were being mentally handled? Like someone always has the upper hand, no matter how calm you are, no matter how careful you are with your words? I have, and it made me curious about something specific. Not just what narcissism looks like, but how it persuades, how it keeps control of the narrative. So, let's look at narcissistic dynamics through 3 classic tools from rhetoric: the art of persuasion, ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos is credibility and identity. Why should you trust me? Who am I in this conversation? Logos is logic and reasoning. Does this make sense? Does the story line up with reality? And pathos is emotion. How does this make you feel? What emotional strings are getting pulled? In healthy communication, all 3 can exist without distortion. In narcissistic dynamics, they often get bent toward one goal: protecting the ego and controlling the narrative. So, with ethos or credibility, in healthy relationships, ethos sounds like, "This is my experience."
Here's what I've learned. Or, I could be wrong. Tell me your side.
It's grounded, it can handle feedback. In narcissistic patterns, ethos often gets inflated, curated, or borrowed. You might hear inflated self-importance, "Nobody does it like I do,"
Or I'm the only one who really understands this.
or status as armor, titles, achievements, even spirituality, where the message underneath is, "I'm above being questioned." Or borrowed credibility, name-dropping and vague association energy.
I work with this big name person. My therapist says I'm actually really self-aware.
Even when the real conversation was more nuanced, and sometimes it shows up as moral or spiritual superiority.
I'm just trying to help you grow.
Or, "I'm more healed than you are." Or,
You're just not at my level yet.
so disagreeing with them doesn't feel like disagreeing with a person, it feels like disagreeing with truth. Here's the twist. That big, shiny ethos is usually fragile underneath. So when you question the story, you might see defensiveness, rage, or instant victimhood. "Everyone's always attacking me, and
People are just jealous.
no one appreciates me." So the ethos of narcissism often sounds like, "If I'm not seen as special, I feel like I'm nothing." And that fear of nothingness drives a lot of performance. Now let's talk about logos, the logic. In healthy communication, logos sounds like, "Let's look at what actually happened."
I might be missing something. Tell me your side. I didn't realize that hurt you. Let's talk about it.
There's room for being wrong. there's room for adjusting the story. In narcissistic dynamics, logos becomes a tool to protect the ego, not to find truth. And that's where logical fallacies start showing up as weapons. Think of these as the cheat codes some people use in arguments. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. First, straw man plus ad hominem. You say one thing, they twist it into something bigger or more extreme, then attack it. I felt hurt when you raised your voice. Them,
So now I'm abusive? You're so dramatic.
and then ad hominem. Instead of addressing behavior, they attack you.
You're paranoid. You always overreact.
What it does, now you're defending your character instead of the original boundary. Spot it. If the conversation jumps from your specific concern to your personality flaws, you're probably in strawman ad hominem territory. 2. If you can't prove it, it didn't happen. Or the appeal to ignorance plus reality distortion. This is the energy of unless you have receipts, your experience doesn't count.
That never happened.
If it was really that bad, you would have left.
What it does is it makes you start outsourcing your reality check. Spot it. If you feel like you constantly need screenshots, notes, or other people to confirm what you lived through, something is off. 3. Whataboutism and false equivalence. You bring up their behavior, and they immediately bring up yours.
It hurt when you flirted with them in front of me.
Them.
What about that time you liked your ex's photo?
What it does, it turns accountability into a comparison game. Spot it. If every attempt to address one issue becomes a debate about your flaws, you're being pulled off topic. And 4. False dilemma and emotional blackmail. Only 2 options are presented: total loyalty or total betrayal.
If you loved me, you'd do this.
Either you're on my side or you're against me.
And it gets reinforced with fear, obligation, or guilt.
After everything I've done for you, no one else will put up with you like I do.
Spot it. If your boundary is treated like proof you don't love them, that's a logic trap, not a relationship truth. And just to be clear, the goal isn't to become a debate champion. The goal is to recognize the pattern early enough to protect your mind and your boundaries. Now, those are the tools on one side. On the other side, there are very human mental habits that can keep these tools working, even for smart, self-aware people. We have cognitive errors that keep victims unprotected. This is not about blaming victims. This is about understanding the mental wiring that manipulators exploit so you can start rewiring it. 1. Confirmation bias and optimism bias. Your brain notices the moments that support what you want to believe.
They apologized once.
They had a good week.
So your brain goes, see, they're changing. And optimism bias adds, it'll get better after the move, the new job, the wedding. What it does, you invest in the fantasy version of them instead of responding to the pattern in front of you. 2. Sunk cost fallacy and cognitive dissonance. Sunk cost says,
I've already invested too much to leave.
we've been together 10 years.
I put so much into helping them heal.
And cognitive dissonance is that pain of holding
They hurt me, and I love them.
at the same time. So the mind tries to reduce the comfort.
It wasn't that bad.
I provoked it.
Here's what it does. You rewrite reality to protect the relationship instead of protecting yourself. 3. Halo effect, personalization, and false responsibility. Halo effect is when one positive trait makes you overlook harm.
They're spiritual. They're successful. They're a great parent.
Personalization says,
This is my fault. If I were calmer, they wouldn't explode.
false responsibility says, it's my job to heal or save them. Here's what it does. Your empathy gets weaponized, and you become the emotional shock absorber for someone who isn't doing their own work. Alright, so we've got manipulative logic on one side, and very human cognitive biases on the other. Now, let's bring this into the Brain Boogerz gym because this is where the whole point of the episode lives. You can train for this. Not perfectly, not overnight, but you can build mental muscle. Think of it like a simple strength session: warm up, main set, and cool down. The warm up is naming the pattern. Your first step is just labeling what happened, quietly, in your own head. Not confronting, not proving, just noticing. Okay, that was whataboutism, or
That was false dilemma, or
that was me slipping into sunk cost thinking.
because naming it moves you from emotional overwhelm into observation. And observation is where your power comes back online. Then there's the main set: one boundary and one self-check. Your main set has 2 moves. Move 1 is set a boundary that keeps you on topic. Try something like,
I'm not going to defend my character right now. I'm talking about this specific behavior.
or
We're drifting. My concern is X.
you're not trying to win, you're refusing to get pulled into the side quest. And then move 2 is a self-check that brings you back to reality. Ask yourself, am I focusing on one good day and ignoring the pattern? Or, if my best friend told me this exact story, what would I tell them? That one question can cut through a lot of fog. And if you want the simplest rep of all, I'm going to pause this conversation and revisit it later. That's not avoidance, that's a boundary. Then there's the cooldown, reflection and safety. After the moment passes, do a quick cooldown. Here, you say, where have I explained away harm with it'll get better after thinking?
or what sunk costs am I using to justify staying? Or when someone hurts me, do I attack myself instead of evaluating their behavior?
And one important safety note: if a relationship feels dangerous or escalating, your next step isn't to argue better. It's to get support and create a safety plan. So here's a quick recap and tiny challenge. We covered the fallacies that get used to manipulate, the cognitive traps that keep people stuck, and a few mental reps you can start practicing. This week, just pick one thing to notice. Maybe it's when a conversation shifts from your concern to your character, or when you catch yourself saying, it'll be different after I prove myself to them. Now, let's move to pathos, or emotion. In healthy relationships, pathos sounds like, I care how you feel.
I want us both to feel safe and heard.
I'm sharing my emotions to connect, not to control. Emotion is meant to build understanding, not to hold power over someone. In narcissistic dynamics, pathos becomes emotional leverage, and here's how that can show up: the hook, charm, and idealization. At the beginning, it can feel magical.
You're the only one who really gets me.
I've never felt this scene before. We're soulmates.
That intensity creates a fast bond. So when red flags show up later, you're already emotionally invested and you don't want to lose that high. Let's talk about some red flags. First up, fear, obligation, and guilt, otherwise known as fog. These 3 are powerful. With fear, you might hear,
If you leave, you'll regret it.
or,
You'll never find someone like me.
or, you're going to destroy this family. With obligation, you might hear,
After everything I've done for you,
you owe me. With guilt, you might hear,
You're so ungrateful. You're hurting me by having boundaries.
and slowly, self-protection starts to feel like you're doing something wrong. There's victimhood as control.
Everyone betrays me.
No one understands how hard my life is. So you end up walking on eggshells, managing their emotions so they don't spiral, explode, or collapse. There's shame and humiliation. Subtle put-downs. Jokes at your expense, using your vulnerabilities as ammo in an argument. Over time, you start to shrink so they can stay big. So the pathos of narcissism often sounds like, I'll use emotion, mine or yours, to keep you orbiting me. Whether that's charm, fear, obligation, guilt, shame, or drama. Let's do one more gentle check-in. When I'm scared of losing someone, do I communicate honestly, or do I reach for guilt, fear, or emotional intensity? Have I ever used my pain as a shield to avoid accountability. Again, this isn't about slapping a label on yourself. It's about noticing what tools are in your toolbox and deciding if you still want to use them. So, let's zoom out and connect the dots. If narcissism is a persuasive style, it often sounds like this. From ethos, I am special, superior, or uniquely wounded, so my perspective is above question. With logos,
I'll bend the story to protect that image.
and with pathos, I'll use emotion, charm, fear, guilt, shame to keep control and connection on my terms. And if you've been on the receiving end of that, your confusion isn't a character flaw. It's a signal that something in the dynamic is designed to keep you off balance. Naming these patterns is one way of stepping outside of that system and saying, wait a minute, I'm allowed to trust myself. I'm allowed to have boundaries. I'm allowed to step back. So, with self-compassion and growth, here are 2 quick notes. First, seeing these patterns in someone else can be deeply validating. It can give you language and help you make a plan for healthier boundaries. And second, seeing pieces of these patterns in yourself does not automatically make you a narcissist. It makes you human. We all defend our image sometimes. We all twist a story in our favor sometimes. We all reach for intensity when we're scared sometimes. The growth work is simple, but not easy. Notice sooner, repair faster, and choose honesty and connection over control and image. So, here's a one-step question. Where do I want to move one step closer to healthy ethos, logos, and pathos? Ethos, can I be honest about my strengths and my limits? Logos, can I stay with the facts, even when it stings my ego? And pathos, can I share emotion without using it as a weapon? If this episode so far has stirred up something for you, take it one step further. Sometime today or this week, journal about a relationship, past or present, where you felt confused, frequently guilty, or like you're always the one apologizing. Ask yourself, how did their ethos show up? Did they need to be the expert, the special one, the victim, the chosen one? How did their logos show up? Did the story keep shifting? And what kind of pathos kept you hooked? Charm, fear, obligation, guilt, shame, or some mix? And then gently flip the lens toward yourself with compassion, not shame, and ask, where do I want to communicate with more honesty, more grounded logic, and more respectful emotion? Your clarity is not a threat, it's a boundary. We often talk about narcissism like it's one size fits all, but in real life, narcissistic traits can show up in very specific areas. So let's look at a few of the most common and sometimes surprising ways narcissism can manifest. And as we go, remember, these aren't separate diagnoses. They're where it shows up. The core pattern is the same. First up, spiritual and religious narcissism. Spiritual or religious narcissism is when someone uses faith, spiritual beliefs, religious practices, or moral superiority to elevate themselves, seek admiration, or control other people. Same core traits, grandiosity, entitlement, lack of empathy, just expressed through spiritual language and behavior. Here are some key features. There's moral superiority.
My path makes me more enlightened than you.
Manipulation and control, or using doctrine to judge, shame, or silence. If you disagree, you're spiritually lost. Seeking admiration. This is needing recognition for being so faithful, so devoted, so holy. There's selective compassion, or empathy only when it supports their image, minimizing others' pain as a lack of faith. And then there's spiritual bypassing, using spiritual ideas to dodge accountability.
Everything happens for a reason, so your pain doesn't matter.
Here's how it differs from other forms. The difference isn't the personality structure, it's the currency. Instead of leveraging looks, money, or status, They leverage spirituality, religion, and morality, and it can be harder to spot because the outside can look admirable, charity, prayer, leadership, while the motivation underneath is ego, not service. Here's some examples. A leader who insists their interpretation is the only correct one and belittles others. Someone who constantly highlights their spiritual achievements and expects special treatment. Using prayer requests as a way to gossip or control the narrative. And dismissing someone's pain as a lack of faith instead of offering support. So where have you experienced spiritual or religious narcissism, personally or in community? And what helps you stay grounded in humility and genuine compassion, even when you feel passionate about your beliefs? Now, zooming out a little, spirituality and religion can offer healing, connection, and purpose. But when misused, they can also become tools for narcissistic or even antisocial behavior, such as control, superiority, and emotional harm. And the hard part is, when you're in it, it can feel like you're swimming in water. It's everywhere, and it's hard to name. So, how do we notice a pattern? Well, one, let's use our language. A lot of should, must, and God told me is used to control or shut you down. Let's look at hierarchy, with rigid power structures where questioning is punished. Let's look at exclusivity. Only our group is right, worthy, or saved. Let's look at the shaming and blaming. Victims are blamed for suffering, you're being punished. And let's also look at the lack of accountability, where leaders who evade responsibility are claiming special spiritual status. And here's where it shows up. Inside faith communities, there's loyalty demanded, questions are discouraged, dissent is punished, and victims are silenced for unity or reputation. And outside the faith communities, public figures using spiritual language for influence, spiritual influencers are presenting themselves as infallible, and movements masking exclusion or control as spiritual truth. And here's why it's so pervasive. There's power dynamics, community pressure, fear and hope, and cultural legacy. With power dynamics, religion can grant authority, and authority can be misused. With community pressure, belonging makes it hard to question or leave. We see with fear and hope promises of safety, salvation, and meaning. These can be exploited. And with cultural legacy, many traditions have histories of hierarchy and exclusion, so change is slow. Now, here's what it can feel like when no one notices. Feels like you're isolated, feeling alone or crazy for questioning. You feel guilt and shame, thinking, I'm not faithful enough. You feel or notice disenchantment, losing trust in community, leaders, or spirituality itself, and then you start to feel hopelessness, feeling powerless to change the system or find a safe home. Here's what you can do on your own. You can cultivate critical awareness. If doubt is punished, that's information. Trust your intuition. Seek healthy community. Look for humility, inclusivity, and accountability. Reclaim your spirituality. Separate your values or relationships with the divine from toxic systems. Speak out and support others. Share with safe people. Support others who are leaving. And practice self-compassion. Spiritual abuse is real. Healing takes time. Now, here's how to stay sane in the face of spiritual narcissism. Stay grounded in your values of compassion, justice, humility, and connection. Limit your exposure and set boundaries. Find allies who value growth and mutual respect. Reflect and replenish through journaling, meditation, or in nature. And celebrate authenticity, as every honest boundary is a win. When have you felt silenced, shamed, or excluded in a spiritual context? What teachings feel life-giving versus oppressive? Who models humility and accountability in your spiritual life? And what boundaries protect your spiritual well-being? Spiritual and religious narcissism can be deeply damaging, but you're not alone. Naming the pattern helps you reclaim your own journey and build a healthier, more compassionate,
spiritual landscape for yourself and for others. 2. Sexual narcissism. Sexual narcissism is when entitlement, admiration seeking, and a lack of empathy show up specifically in someone's sexual behavior and expectations. Some key features of this are entitlement, exploitation, grandiosity, a need for admiration, low empathy, and manipulation. So with entitlement, there's a believing they deserve sexual access or satisfaction regardless of consent or needs. With exploitation, there's using partners for gratification while disregarding comfort or boundaries. With grandiosity, there's an inflated view of their sexual prowess or desirability. With a need for admiration, there's craving praise and reassurance about performance. With low empathy, there's little concern for the partner's experience, and with manipulation, they're using sex as a tool for control or self-esteem. And here's how it shows up: boasting about conquests or skills, pressuring or coercing, treating sex like performance, not connection, rage or rejection when boundaries are set, and using sexual attention as a primary source of self-worth. And here's why this matters. Research links sexual narcissism to lower relationship satisfaction, higher infidelity, and risk-taking, and increased likelihood of coercion or aggression. 3. Communal narcissism. Communal narcissism is when someone expresses superiority through being seen as the most caring, moral, generous, or community-oriented person in the room. Here are some key features.
No one helps like I do.
Needing recognition for good deeds. Entitlement to moral authority. Generosity with strings attached. Hypocrisy, image over impact, and sensitivity to criticism. And here's how it shows up: by constantly talking about charity and kindness, expecting public acknowledgement or leadership roles, withdrawing help if not praised, and guilt-tripping. After all I've done for you? Here's why it matters. It can hide behind good deeds, making relationships feel transactional and leaving others confused or guilty for not feeling grateful enough. 4. Somatic narcissism. Somatic narcissism is when self-worth and validation are centered on the body, be it appearance, health, fitness, or sexuality. Here are some key features. There's obsession with appearance and image, self-esteem tied to attractiveness or physical edge, constant need for compliments, competitive and judgmental comparisons, using looks and sexuality for power, and dismissing others' emotional needs. And here's how it shows up: through excessive time and money on appearance or fitness, bragging about attractiveness or conquests, flirting for validation, even in inappropriate contexts, criticizing others' bodies, and rage or despair around aging, injury, or losing the edge. Here's why it matters. It can create shallow, transactional relationships and a fragile self-worth that's easily threatened. 5. Parental narcissism. Parental narcissism is when a parent's identity, validation, and control are tied to their children's achievement, behavior, or image, treating the child like an extension of themselves. Here are some key features: enmeshment, conditional love, achievement obsession, low empathy for the child's inner world, manipulation and guilt, and role reversal or parentification. Here's how it shows up: living through the child's accomplishments, boasting about the child as a reflection of the parent, withdrawing love when the child asserts independence, competing with the child for attention, and invalidating feelings that challenge the parent's authority. Potential impact on children are chronic self-doubt, boundary struggles, guilt or anxiety, and approval-seeking patterns in adulthood. And here's the deeper layer. Parental narcissism can shape your attachment style, the way your nervous system learns to do closeness and safety. When love feels conditional, when the parent's mood sets the weather in the house, or when you're treated like an extension of their image, kids don't just get over it, they adapt. That adaptation often shows up as anxious attachment, where you learn to earn love, people-pleasing, hypervigilance, reassurance-seeking, or fear of abandonment. There's avoidant attachment, where you learn needs aren't safe, so you shut down, stay independent, and keep emotional distance. Or as disorganized attachment, where you learn closeness is both wanted and dangerous, so you get stuck in push-pull dynamics and become more vulnerable to trauma bonding later. And none of this means you're broken. It means your system learned what it had to learn to survive. And if you're hearing yourself in any of that, just breathe. Awareness is the first rep. And 6, workplace narcissism. Workplace narcissism is when admiration-seeking, entitlement, and control show up most strongly in professional settings. Here are some key features. There's exaggerated self-importance, entitlement to special treatment, manipulation through kiss up and kick down, low empathy for colleagues, credit stealing, blame shifting, boundary violations and micromanagement, and undermining competition. And here's how it shows up: through constantly seeking praise and power, through dismissing or sabotaging colleagues, by withholding information to maintain control, through public humiliation as dominance, and through retaliation when challenged. And here's the impact. There's low morale, burnout, turnover, suppressed collaboration, and a toxic culture. And here's how workers can protect themselves. It's practical and not perfect. If you're dealing with workplace narcissism, the goal usually isn't to win the narcissist. The goal is to protect your credibility, your nervous system, and your options. A few grounded ways to do that are: document and confirm in writing. After meetings, send recap emails. Per our conversation, the next steps are: this isn't petty, it's clarity. Keep communication boring and factual. Short, neutral, task-oriented. Don't feed drama. Don't over-explain. Don't debate your reality. Set boundaries with access. Limit unscheduled calls. Keep meetings agenda-based, and use phrases like, happy to discuss. What outcomes do we need by the end of this meeting? Build allies and visibility. Don't isolate. Share progress in team channels. Ask for feedback publicly when appropriate, and make sure your work has witnesses. And finally, protect your energy and plan exits. If the culture rewards the behavior, your best boundary might be a job search. You're not failing, you're choosing health. And one more thing. If you're being retaliated against, harassed, or publicly humiliated, that's not office politics. That's a workplace safety issue. Get support. HR if it's safe, a trusted leader, or external counsel. And prioritize your well-being. Now, if that's enlightening, here are a few real-world patterns you might recognize across relationships. In romance, we may experience the admiration vacuum, the always right, never wrong, the monologue mode, the dimming your shine, and the extreme jealousy and control version. In our friendships, we may experience the one-person show, the emotional mute, the favors with strings, the blame shifting, and the covert competition version. At work, we may experience the glory thief, the blame juggler, the constant self-promotion, the lone wolf control, and the special treatment expectations version. And even in our families, we may experience the guilt-tripping expert, the sibling competition for validation, the praise vacuum behavior, the dismissive criticism, and the shallow love without emotional connection versions. These domain-specific types aren't separate diagnoses. They're where narcissism tends to manifest. Type equals where it shows up: sex, helping, body, parenting, work. And level equals how intense it is, mild traits to pathological patterns. And understanding this helps you spot red flags earlier and protect your well-being, because narcissism isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides behind helpfulness, holiness, good looks, or parenting pride. So where do you land? Which patterns have you noticed in yourself or others? Where are you most vulnerable to seeking validation? Appearance? Relationships? Work? Helping? How does naming the pattern help you set healthier boundaries? When you're criticized, do you get defensive, angry, dismissive? And what's that about? Is empathy hard sometimes, or do you feel chronically misunderstood? And when you help, is it to feel needed or to genuinely support? If you answered yes to some of these, you might have narcissistic traits because most humans do to some degree. The goal isn't to label yourself, it's to get curious and honest. Now, let's clear up a few myths. Because misinformation keeps people stuck, blaming themselves, minimizing harm, or missing the signs. Myth 1. All narcissists are loud, flashy, or extroverted. Not true. Some are grandiose and attention-seeking, others are quiet, anxious, self-pitying, or self-deprecating, more vulnerable, or covert. Narcissism isn't about volume, it's about entitlement, manipulation, and empathy gaps. Myth 2. Narcissism is just high self-confidence. Nope. Healthy confidence is secure and doesn't need to put others down. Narcissism is often fragile underneath. Self-worth depends on admiration, control, or superiority. True confidence lifts people up. Narcissism tends to push people down. And myth 3. You can love someone out of narcissism. No. Love doesn't replace accountability. No amount of patience or sacrifice can fix someone who doesn't want to change. Real change requires self-awareness and follow-through, often with professional help. And sometimes, pouring more love into someone who refuses growth can reinforce entitlement. So your job isn't to rescue, your job is to protect your well-being. Where have you tried to love someone into changing? And what did it cost you? Narcissism wears many masks. It's not just loud, confident, or bad. It's patterns, entitlement, manipulation, empathy gaps, sometimes hidden in plain sight. And it doesn't only show up in romance, it shows up in families, friendships, workplaces, and even culture. Narcissism can become a family system with roles, rules, and dynamics that ripple through generations. And it can also be shaped by external influences such as media, social networks, and public figures. So now we're moving into the impact. What happens when narcissistic patterns enter relationships, and why, even when you know someone isn't good for you, it can still feel almost impossible to let go. This is the part where a lot of people finally go, oh, that's why. If this is helpful, take 1 second to subscribe so you don't lose this thread. And if you know someone dealing with a confusing work situation, family dynamic, or relationship, send it to them. We're not meant to figure this out alone. Also, as we go deeper, the section discusses narcissism and relational trauma. Some examples may bring up strong emotions or memories, and if you start to feel overwhelmed, again, take care of yourself. You can pause, skip ahead, grab some water, breathe, or reach out for support. And again, if you need help, you can contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-SAFE, or connect with a mental health professional in your area. Again, my goal here is education, validation, and hope, not blame or shame. So listen at your pace. And again, I want to make this clear. This episode is dedicated to the fellow narcissist listening, trying to figure out, is this about me? And if you think this podcast is about you, like I said in the beginning, it's okay. It is. Because it's not just about them, it's also about us, our traits, our attachment patterns, and the emotional habits we carry. One way to understand vulnerability in relationships is through personality traits, what psychology calls the Big Five. I use the acronym CANOE. C is for conscientiousness, with traits such as being organized, reliable, or disciplined. A is for agreeableness, with traits such as being compassionate, cooperative, and peacekeeping. N is for neuroticism, with traits centered around being sensitive to stress, rejection, and negative emotion. O is for openness to experiences. This is with traits that focus on being curious, imaginative, and open to experience. And E is for extroversion, with traits that really speak on where you get your energy, be it outgoing, energetic, and social, or to yourself and in solitude. Here's why this matters. Research suggests people who are high in agreeableness and high in eroticism can be especially vulnerable to manipulation. Agreeable people want peace, and eroticism can come with a strong need for reassurance and a fear of abandonment. Meanwhile, people who are more naturally assertive or more conscientious may spot red flags sooner and set boundaries earlier. This isn't about better or worse. It's about knowing your wiring so you can protect yourself. And then there's attachment style, which I mentioned earlier under parental narcissism, formed early, shaped by relationships, and it shows up hard in adult love. There's the secure attachment, which is comfortable with closeness and independence, and is less likely to tolerate toxic dynamics. The anxious attachment craves closeness, fears rejection, and may cling to validation. Avoidant attachment values independence, struggles with intimacy, and may be drawn to confidence, but keep emotional distance. And disorganized attachment wants closeness but fears it, and can feel stuck in chaotic push-pull dynamics. If you have an anxious or disorganized style, you might find yourself repeatedly drawn to narcissistic patterns, hoping to finally earn love, safety, or approval. If you're more secure, you may still get pulled in, but you're more likely to leave sooner once the pattern becomes clear. So let me ask you, which canoe traits feel most like you? And what attachment pattern do you recognize in your relationships? Understanding your patterns isn't blame, it's leverage. The more you know, the more power you have to break cycles and choose healthier connections. And here's the other layer. Sometimes it's not just a person, it's the environment. We're living in a culture that can reward image, performance, and attention, sometimes at the expense of empathy and depth. So if you feel like you're swimming in it, you're not imagining it. Now, how do we act on our own accord without losing our minds? There's mindful consumption. You can curate your feeds and take breaks from toxic content. There's critical awareness, where you name what you see, such as this rewards drama over substance. There's authentic expression, where you can tell the truth in your own life, even if it's risky. There's micro-communities, where you can find a few people who value growth and accountability. And always, there's self-compassion. Resisting the cultural current is hard. That doesn't mean you're failing. And that brings us to something I really want to name. Sometimes we don't recognize toxicity, not because we're stupid, not because we're weak, but because we've been in it for so long that it starts to feel normal. It's like nose blindness, when a smell is always in the air and you stop noticing it, or like being a fish in water. You don't notice the water because it's all you've ever known. But healing often starts when you become the flying fish. You get just enough distance to see, oh, this isn't normal. This is harming me. And once you finally see it, the next question is usually, okay, if it's so bad, why is it so hard to leave? Have you ever found yourself irresistibly drawn to someone, even when you know they're not good for you? Maybe you keep going back after being hurt. Maybe you crave their attention, their approval, the highs, almost like a drug. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone, and you're not weak. What people often call being addicted to a narcissist is a powerful mix of psychology, biology, and conditioning that can keep you hooked. Here's how it often shows up. Through intense highs and lows, with love bombing, then withdrawal or devaluation, then a rush of affection again. That roller coaster can create emotional dependence. Through craving their approval. See, their attention feels like a reward, and their silence feels like punishment. Through obsessive thinking, when you're replaying conversations, analyzing, trying to solve what went wrong. And then there's the loss of self, where over time, your identity and self-worth start orbiting their moods and opinions. And if you're listening like, MJ, why does this feel chemical? Because it kind of is. There's a term that explains why so many people feel trapped in relationships with narcissists or other toxic partners: trauma bonding. You might wonder, if it's so bad, why can't I just walk away? Trauma bonding is a big part of that answer. And I want to be clear, trauma bonding is not a character flaw, it's a survival response. Trauma bonding is a powerful emotional attachment that forms when someone repeatedly hurts, manipulates, or destabilizes you, and then intermittently gives you affection, attention, apologies, or relief. It's driven by cycles: pain, uncertainty, relief, hope, pain again. And those unpredictable good moments can reinforce the bond in your nervous system, like your body starts chasing the next moment of relief. Here are a few common mechanisms that build the bond. 1. Intermittent reinforcement. They alternate between kindness and cruelty, love bombing, apologies, gifts, then criticism, withdrawal, and blame. The unpredictability makes the good feel rare and precious, so you cling harder. 2. Isolation. They may slowly separate you from friends, family, or support, so they become your main emotional reference point. 3. Gaslighting and self-doubt. You start questioning your memory, your judgment, your worth, so you seek their approval to feel stable again. And 4. Hope for change. You keep reaching for the good version of them, believing if you just do it right, the relationship will go back to the early days. And hope is powerful. Hope is human. But hope can also be exploited. Now, here are some signs you might be experiencing a trauma bond. You feel unable to leave, even though you know it's harming you. You make excuses for the behavior or blame yourself for their mistreatment. You crave their approval and feel anxious, empty, or panicky when you're apart. You keep returning after breakups, hoping this time will be different. Or you feel isolated, or you hide the truth from people who love you. If any of those hits, I'm not judging you. I'm naming it so you can get free. Breaking a trauma bond can be hard for a few reasons. Biologically, your brain starts chasing the next reward: attention, affection, apology, or relief. Emotionally, there's the guilt or responsibility or fear of being alone or fear you'll never find love again. Or even culturally, where messages like "love conquers all,"
Stick it out.
"be patient,"
Don't give up.
are being pushed. Sometimes, culture teaches endurance when what you actually need is safety. So, what are the first steps? 1. Name it. Call it what it is: a trauma bond, not true love, not destiny, not chemistry. 2. Reach out. Confide in a trusted friend, family member, therapist, or support group, someone who understands the trauma and won't minimize it. 3. Rebuild your identity. Reconnect with what makes you, you. Hobbies, routines, friendships, goals, faith, or values that feel life-giving. 4. Set boundaries. Limit contact if possible. If you can't fully cut contact due to kids, work, or shared obligations, keep communication brief, factual, and emotionally neutral. And 5. Practice self-compassion. Remind yourself, staying wasn't because you were stupid. Your nervous system was doing its best to survive. Healing is restraining, slowly, safely, and over time. Now let me ask you, where have you minimized harm because you were chasing the next good moment? What would change if you prioritized your safety and peace over being understood? And who can you reach out to today? Leaving a trauma-bonded relationship is one of the bravest and hardest things you can do. The pull is real, the confusion is real, and so is the hope that things will change. So if you're listening and wondering, how do I actually get out and heal? This is for you. 1. Build your support system. Tell at least one safe person what's going on. Let them know you may need emotional or practical help, someone to call, a place to stay, backup for hard moments. 2. Make a safety plan. If you fear retaliation or escalation, plan your exit when the other person isn't around. Gather essentials, important documents, keys, medications, cash if possible, and emergency contacts. And know local resources as well as hotlines, shelters, and legal aid. 3. Set clear, firm boundaries. Keep it simple. This relationship is no longer healthy for me. I need space to heal. You don't owe a debate. You don't owe a courtroom presentation. Avoid getting pulled into blame games, circular arguments, or emotional bargaining. 4. Limit or cut contact. If it's safe and possible, consider no contact. Block numbers, emails, social media. If you must stay in contact, use brief, factual communication. No emotional processing, no defending yourself. 5. Expect withdrawal symptoms. You may feel anxiety, sadness, guilt, cravings, even physical discomfort. That doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means your brain is adjusting to the loss of the emotional drug. The feelings pass. You are not alone. 6. Rebuild your identity and routine. Reconnect with hobbies, friends, movement, and creativity. Anything that restores your sense of self. Therapy and survivor support groups can be game changers here. And 7. Practice radical self-compassion. Forgive yourself for staying. You were doing your best with what you knew and what you had. Celebrate small steps. Even if you stumble, you're still moving toward freedom. So what fears make leaving feel impossible? And where did those fears come from? What's one small act of self-respect you can take in the next 24 hours? And who can support you this week? If you need support, there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. Again, 1-800-799-SAFE. Or thehotline.org. And if you're in immediate danger, contact local emergency services. You are worthy of safety, respect, and love that doesn't hurt. Exiting a trauma bond isn't just leaving a person, it's reclaiming your life, one step at a time. Let's top this off with something people ask constantly. Can narcissists really change? What does real accountability look like? How do you set boundaries that protect you? And what does recovery and healthy love look like after narcissistic abuse? Let's go there. This is a question I mull over a lot. Are narcissists impossible to help? And can they ever really change? It's a tough one, because the answer is both hopeful and a little sobering. Research suggests that people with high levels of narcissism, especially those who meet criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, rarely seek help on their own. Denial and lack of self-awareness are core features of narcissism, according to a 2013 study by the American Psychiatric Association. Many only enter therapy because of external pressure, relationship fallout, workplace consequences, or legal trouble. But here's the hopeful part. Change is possible if the person is willing to do the work. And I'll say it like this. If we, regular people, everyday civil scientists, learn the patterns, name them, and stop rewarding them, we can change our relationships and we can change the culture. Studies have found that when people with high narcissistic traits do engage in therapy, especially approaches like schema therapy or psychodynamic therapy, they can develop more empathy, better self-awareness, and healthy relationships. Progress is usually slow, setbacks are common, and motivation has to come from within, not from partners, friends, or family trying to fix them. So here's the real talk, limits and boundaries. You can't force someone to change if they don't want to. Trying to fix a narcissist can leave you drained and defeated, and the most effective thing you can do is set clear boundaries, protect your well-being, and encourage professional help if they're open to it. Now here's some signs someone might be open to change. You might see a genuine remorse or curiosity about their impact, willingness to hear feedback without lashing out or blaming, seeking therapy on their own initiative, not just to appease someone, and small but consistent efforts to take responsibility and practice empathy. Now, here's some action steps for you. If you're dealing with a narcissist and hoping for change, ask yourself, am I taking care of my own boundaries and needs? Am I trying to rescue or change someone who isn't interested in changing? And what support do I need for myself, regardless of what they choose? Remember, you can't want growth for someone more than they want it for themselves. Change is possible, but it's rare, and it's never your job to fix someone. Focus on your own growth, boundaries, and healing. That's where your real power lives. If you're in a relationship, be it romantic, family, work, or friendship, with someone who shows narcissistic traits, here are the ways to protect your well-being. Know your limits, set clear boundaries, avoid arguing about reality, don't rely on them for validation, prioritize your self-care, don't take responsibility for their feelings, and have an exit plan. If you're in a relationship, remember, you can't control someone else's growth, but you can always choose to protect and nurture your own. Well, what about managing relationships with narcissists? What works and what doesn't? Well, if you're in a relationship, be it romantic, family, work, or friendship, with someone who has narcissistic personality disorder or strong narcissistic traits, you already know it's a different world. The usual rules don't always apply, and sometimes what feels like the right thing to do can make it worse. Here's what tends to work. Set and maintain firm boundaries, limit your emotional investment, use the gray rock method, prioritize your support system, document important interactions if needed, and practice radical acceptance. Now, what usually doesn't work and can make things worse is appealing to empathy or guilt, expecting insight or accountability on demand, getting pulled into arguments or power struggles, over-explaining or justifying yourself, sacrificing your needs to keep the peace and relying on them for emotional support. Healthy detachment, strong boundaries, and outside support are linked to better outcomes for people affected by narcissistic personality disorder relationships. Studies also suggest that enabling patterns can prolong emotional harm in relationships with pathological narcissism. Codependency is a pattern where a person habitually puts others' needs, feelings, or problems above their own, often losing touch with their own identity and boundaries. The core traits can include a difficulty setting or enforcing boundaries, chronic people-pleasing or conflict avoidance, self-worth tied to being needed or rescuing others, fear of rejection, abandonment, or being alone, and neglect of personal needs and desires. Codependent individuals often pair with narcissists, creating a giver-taker dynamic. The codependent's need to be needed can feed the narcissist's need for attention, admiration, or control. Some common patterns are the codependent absorbs blame, tries to fix problems, and rationalizes mistreatment. And also, the narcissist exploits this through manipulation, gaslighting, and shifting responsibility. The impact is the codependent may lose self-esteem and autonomy, while the narcissist's unhealthy patterns are enabled and reinforced. So here's some questions to ask yourself. Where have I been trying to get empathy or validation from someone who can't give it? What's one boundary I can set this week to protect my energy? And who can I reach out to for real support? Remember, you can't change or heal someone else's narcissism, but you can change how you show up, what you tolerate, and how you care for yourself. Narcissism can feel like being in a boxing ring, blow after blow without adequate defenses. Even if you're not a martial arts practitioner, you can borrow this philosophy. Aikido teaches you to blend, redirect, and stay centered without getting trapped in the cycle of conflict. You, 1, notice the attack, pause, breathe. Remind yourself you don't have to engage emotionally. Then you blend, don't clash. I hear your perspective, or I see this as important to you. Next, you redirect that energy. I'm not willing to discuss this right now, or
Let's talk when we're both calm.
After that, you use minimal force to disengage.
I'm stepping away from this conversation.
Or we can revisit this later, or not at all. And then finally, affirm your center.
I handled that in a way that honors my boundaries.
Or
their reaction doesn't define my worth.
remember, you have the right to protect your peace. Healing isn't about winning an argument or convincing someone to change, it's about reclaiming your power, clarity, and sanity. So, where can you blend and redirect instead of clashing? And what helps you stay centered when faced with emotional manipulation? So our goal here is shining a light and supporting survivors. We do this through education and awareness, destigmatizing help seeking, encourage self-reflection, challenge social myths, and build safe communities. Now, when have you felt pressured to give more than you receive in a relationship? And what behaviors have you normalized that may actually be red flags? Who can you reach out to for support or perspective? And what boundaries would you set if you felt truly safe and empowered? Abuse by individuals with narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder thrives in silence and confusion. By naming these patterns, sharing resources, and building supportive communities, we empower survivors to reclaim their reality and their power. Healing is possible, and so is cultural change. Now, as we close this topic, I want to offer you not just strategies for self-defense, but also a path to healing and reclaiming your peace. Aikido teaches us to blend, redirect, and stay centered, not to get stuck in the cycle of conflict. But what do we do with the emotional energy left behind after an encounter with a narcissist? This is where Eckhart Tolle's story about ducks comes in. He describes how, after two ducks get into a scuffle on a pond, they flap their wings vigorously, releasing the pent-up energy. Then they glide away peacefully, the conflict completely behind them, or so he said. Tolle's takeaway is, if the duck had a human mind, it would keep the fight alive by thinking, by story making. But the duck just flaps its wings and lets it go. Here's how to flap your wings after narcissistic encounters. Acknowledge the energy, then release it physically. Let the story go, and then affirm your boundaries. In that acknowledgement of the energy, you have to notice if you're holding anger, fear, or confusion after a difficult interaction. Then to release it physically, you might need to just shake out your hands, take deep breaths, or go for a brisk walk, anything to move the energy out of your body. With letting the story go, you might say to yourself, that was their story, not mine. I choose to return to my center. And then affirm your boundaries. Use the Aikido script. Then give yourself permission to move forward like the duck. Healing from narcissistic abuse isn't just about boundaries. It's about learning to process and release what isn't yours to carry. After every confrontation, give yourself the gift of a wing flap, a ritual to shake off the residue and claim your clarity. So, what is your version of flapping your wings, and how do you release emotional tension and return to your own peaceful waters after conflict? Before we close out, I want to share a practice that's helped me and many others find peace even after the hardest relationships. It's called Ho'oponopono, and it comes from Hawaiian tradition. And at its heart, it's about making things right, inside ourselves and in our connections with others. It's a process of forgiveness, release, and healing. This isn't about excusing harmful behavior or pretending pain didn't happen. It's about freeing yourself from the grip of resentment, guilt, or shame, and allowing space for true growth. The practice is simple, but profound. It uses 4 phrases spoken with intention. I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. You can direct those words to yourself, to someone who's hurt you, or even to a part of your own story that needs healing. If it feels right, close your eyes, take a breath, and recall a relationship or memory that's ready for release. Repeat quietly or in your heart, I'm sorry for the ways I've hurt myself or others, knowingly or unknowingly. Please forgive me for holding on to pain, for what I did or didn't do. Thank you for the lessons, the growth, the chance to try again. And I love you, to myself, to the part of me that's healing, to the world. You don't have to feel all the words right away. The practice is the point, showing up again and again with compassion. And finally, let's talk about the power of naming. You know, it's the deeply powerful moment in healing and growth when you can finally get language for something that you've been living. There isn't one single universally agreed term, but there are a few concepts that point to it. There's linguistic relativity, where the word gives it shape. Having language changes how you understand and relate to an experience. There's concept acquisition and conceptual clarification, where you had the felt sense and now you have the conceptual handle. There's the psychoeducation moment, when information and language suddenly map onto lived experience. And then there's validation through naming, the relief that comes from naming your experience. Or here's another way to say it. It's the relief of finally having language for your lived experience, or the moment a concept finds you, or that click of recognition when a term puts shape around your reality. As we end this discussion, remember, forgiveness isn't about letting someone else off the hook. It's about letting yourself off the hook, releasing the weight, and making room for something better. You can return to Ho'oponopono anytime you need a reset, a moment of peace, or a way to let go. And as you go, consider, what does healthy love feel like to you? What are your new non-negotiables? What part of this discussion resonated most with you? How have you seen narcissistic dynamics play out in your own life? And what's one small step you can take this week toward healthier relationships with others and yourself? You are worthy of safety, respect, and love that doesn't hurt, and a life that feels like your own. Today, we took a full, honest look at narcissism, not as a buzzword, not as a costume we slap on the villain, but as a pattern that can show up in people, relationships, families, workplaces, and even in culture. We talked about what narcissism is and what it isn't. We broke down the difference between type and level, where narcissistic traits show up, and how intense those patterns become. We named the myths that keep people stuck, like the idea that narcissists are always loud, or that narcissism is just confidence, or that you can love someone into changing. We also zoomed in on the ways narcissism can hide in plain sight, behind spirituality, sexuality, helpfulness, parenting pride, body image, or workplace status. Then we went into the part that's hard but freeing. Why toxic relationships can feel addictive, what trauma bonding is, how it forms, and why leaving isn't just about willpower. It's about your nervous system, your attachment patterns, and the cycle of intermittent reinforcement. And most importantly, we talked about what to do next, how to name the pattern, reach for support, rebuild your identity, set boundaries, and, if needed, make a safe plan to exit and recover. So, if you're walking away from this episode with one thing, let it be this: you're not crazy, you're not weak, and you're not alone. Clarity is possible, healing is possible, and you're allowed to choose relationships that don't cost you your peace. If this episode gave you language for something you've been living through, do me a favor, subscribe, and share it with one person who needs it. And remember, on Brain Boogerz, we don't just clock the mess, we pick it and we dig in so we can heal, grow, and move forward with our whole selves intact. For now, keep questioning, keep reflecting, and keep moving forward. And join me next time where we'll pick and dig in on Brain Boogerz.